We all do have stories. It's learning how to deliver those stories in a really impactful manner that makes the difference.
Welcome to the Vistage Podcast series. I'm Dave Nelsen, a Vistage member since 2003, part of CE 676 in Pittsburgh, and your podcast host. Every episode, we connect with an extraordinary business expert to get valuable ideas to apply in our own organizations. Today, we're talking about the art and heart of storytelling, and I'm joined by Mikki Williams, a CSP. That stands for Certified Speaking Professional, and she's also a member of the prestigious Speaker Hall of Fame and a TEDx speaker. So, Mikki, welcome to the Vistage Podcast.
Thank you, Dave. Delighted to be here.
So a little bit more about Mikki for those of you who've not met her, although I think you've met more people in the world than probably the rest of us, Mikki. So Mikki was chosen as one of the best speakers in the country by Meetings and Convention magazine, along with, get this company, Tony Robbins, Bill Gates, Lou Holtz, Zig Ziglar, and Jay Leno. So not a bad crowd to hang with. Mikki is also an award-winning Vistage speaker and a master chair of 2 Vistage groups in Chicago. Mikki, let's talk a little bit about why storytelling is important to business owners or executives. Let's start out maybe with an anecdote. So take it away.
But just let me give you just a little background before the anecdote, if I can, Dave. You know, we have neuroscience right now and cultural anthropology have kind of given some light to the fact that we're wired for stories, and that the old left brain, right brain, it's not out the window, but more importantly, the fact that we are wired for stories has brought it to the forefront now, and that's really affirmed it. It's one of the things I talked about in my TED Talk. So what I'm trying to do with a lot of my clients and spread out without our community is, even if you have to use data, as many do, you know, I work with engineers and investment bankers, it's how do you wrap the data in a story so it's more, for lack of a better word, palatable. We can relate to it, because stories don't tell us how to think, they give us something to think upon.
Okay.
So in relation to you asking me a particular anecdote, one comes to mind, Dave. I did a tour of Vistage UK last year, and I think you've done that as well.
I have.
And I was doing my presentation, The Art and Heart of Storytelling, and one of the CEOs, it resonated with him, and he hired me via Skype to work with him because he was changing the name of his company. And as you know, that's a big deal, and not everybody deals well with change. So we thought, you know, this would be a good time for me to really deliver the speech where all the employees are not rolling their eyes when the CEO stands up to give an address. So I started by asking him a lot of questions, which is what I do, where most of the people I work with don't know what I'm going for, but you'll see this as it emerges. I said, so, Jim, tell me about your family. And he started by saying, oh, yeah, I have a new family. We just had our first son. I said, oh, that's wonderful. How is that? He said, well, it sure is, you know, it changes your life. Now, remember, I'm looking for change throughout this whole conversation. Then he went on to say that they gave birth to a special needs child, and he emphasized more of the change that happened in his life. I segued over and said, well, tell me about how you started your business. And he said, oh, you know, the proverbial coffee shop with your best buddy, grab a paper napkin and jot down your ideas. And I said, well, how was that for you? And he said, well, it sure changed our lives, starting our own company. And then I went for the third one when I said, well, tell me about a key employee that comes to mind right away. And he said, oh, yeah, I can tell you about Susan. She's our HR director. What she did changed the whole dynamic of the company. Well, I had the whole speech. He didn't have any of it. He had no clue until the next session when I said, all right, you're going to open your speech with this quote. Change is inevitable. Growth is optional. You're going to state your objectives. And by the way, for everybody listening to this, this is a format for any speech. Give it 7 minutes or 7 hours. You have an opening line. You state your objectives because you want everybody to know where you're going with your presentation. Yeah, and then he told 3 stories. The one about having changed with his child, having changed with starting a business, and having changed through an employee. And then we wrapped it up by restating objectives, and he ended with, change is inevitable, growth is optional, let's grow.
All right. And that was where he rolls out the new name of the company.
Absolutely.
And with that motivation, now people are, well, you've created the opening so that they are ready to embrace that growth.
Yes. Absolutely.
That's great. So what would be like the key lesson you would want our C-suite executives or business owners to take away then?
I want them to do a little exercise that I do in my speaker school, where you just free form all the stories of your life and your business. Get out of just the left brain and thinking business. Think about everything from the day you were born. People say I have no stories. And just keyword them, Dave. So what I do in my speech that I do for Vistage, I'll say, Dave, what's your favorite vacation spot? What comes to mind, Dave?
Oh, boy. I'm going to say Key West.
Okay, so if I said, Dave, could you tell me the story about Key West? Could you do that?
Oh, I absolutely could. I was
right.
at a wedding in Miami and drove down to Key West, and it was fabulous.
Okay, and if I saw you 2 years from now and I said, Dave, oh, gosh, would you tell me, my friend, that Key West story? It was really good. Could you tell it again?
Of course. Of course.
Would it be word for word?
No, because it's tied into I remember it because of the emotions of the experience.
Right. So here's the deal. I would challenge all of them to collect stories and keyword them. And then at the point that you have to make a presentation, no matter what the purpose of it is, find those stories that can further that message that you want in your presentation. And take, as I said, the data. And, Brian Bolio is a perfect example. The first time I heard Brian, who uses more data than an economist? Who's more boring than an economist? Certainly not Brian and Alan, great sense of humor. But I'll never forget, Dave, he was presenting data on the real estate industry. And instead of just putting the data up on the screen, he told a story about his daughter buying her first house. And for then, we were able to tune into the data. It had relevance. It anchored us back to something emotional. Because what everyone is, and they don't know it, so I'm about to tell them, Dave, right now.
Okay.
They're in the emotional transportation business.
The emotional transportation business. Okay, I like that.
Every time you give a presentation, no matter what it is, you are transporting some feeling to someone else who's internalizing from their own experience. And that's what creates the dynamic.
Yeah, you're now connecting with a lot of things that I've heard along the way. You're re-reminding, right? People don't remember what you said. They remember how you made them feel, right?
Right.
And so this is the idea. And I've also heard it said that people remember only 10% of what they hear or read, for that matter. But again, if you can connect to that emotion, back to Key West, I remember it because of the emotions there.
Yeah. And when on day 2 of my speaker school, which is mostly Vistage members, they stand up and we teach the skills on day 1, and they stand up on day 2 and do these video presentations, kind of like what we're doing now. And all I ask them to do is tell a story, not to figure out the message, the point, or anything. And then at the end, as a group, we say, well, that could have been a story about risk. That could have been a story about change. Because a lot of times people are not trained to think that way. Here's one statement that I just made, because I love using metaphors, Dave.
People love metaphors. Yeah, absolutely.
Speaking is a craft. It's because a lot of us talk, we think we can speak, but there's Gustavo once said when he attended my speaker school, we don't know what we don't know. And there's a lot of elements to giving a good presentation, as you know, and part of that is understanding how to transport people to different emotions, and we don't take the time because we've never been taught how to do it, and that's really what impacts people the most.
So some people apparently say I've got no stories, but your point is everybody's got stories, right?
Your birth was a story.
Yeah, right. That's true. So find your stories, keyword them, and then you can start to connect them to whatever message or change or whatever you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so much, speaking without, let me put it this way, telling stories without learning how to speak is like making wine without grapes. And you know that because you're a winemaker, right?
I am a winemaker. I got lots of stories there too, Mikki.
Yeah, so that's what I meant about get some speaking skills so you really know how to craft a story, because that's going to get you, whether you're in sales or doing a state of the industry address, that's what's going to get your point across.
All right, so I'm going to try an analogy back on you. You can't make great wine without great grapes, right? So you can't make a great presentation without great stories.
Every story has greatness to it. You just don't recognize that. I'm the professional. I don't make wine, Dave. Right?
Okay.
I can play tennis. That doesn't mean I'm a great tennis player. And that's what I mean. People can talk. They think they can speak. It's a craft. but we all do have stories. It's learning how to deliver those stories in a really impactful manner that makes the difference.
All right, so let's frame a parting question for our listeners today that will get them thinking.
I have a good one, if I may say so myself. I just did this with a Vistage group this week. I would challenge every one of them to come up with a metaphor for their product or service. First of all, people don't know how to use metaphors. If you sell pipe fitting, and I don't understand what pipe fitting is, say, pipe fitting is like... and everybody was challenged by that. So I gave it to them as a takeaway because they couldn't do it on the spot, but they said, I like that. Because so often we speak to prospects, sales, our employee, whatever, and we're speaking from our own experience or of a product or service that we know so intimately, but somebody else is not getting it. So when you see that glaze, get that metaphor down. That's a good way. That's almost like a mini story.
Okay, that's fabulous. That's fabulous. Well, Mikki Williams, as always, it was a delight speaking with you today. Thanks so much for joining us on the podcast.
Hey, thanks, Dave, for inviting me. It's always great to be in your company.
I always love connecting with you, too. So, folks, if you're interested in learning more about Vistage, please check out Vistage.com. Learning and applying this kind of information to your business, this is how and why Vistage member companies outperform their peers and competitors. It's a great way to take your business to the next level. So, thank you for watching or listening to this episode of the Vistage Podcast series. Have a great day.